The past holds many secrets, and some of them are shrouded in mystery and intrigue. For centuries, the story of Cleopatra and Mark Antony has captured our imaginations, fueling our fascination with ancient Egypt and its legendary rulers. But what if the truth about their final resting place has been hidden from us all along? After years of searching, a team of archaeologists has uncovered a long-forgotten tunnel buried deep beneath an ancient temple in Egypt. Could this be the way to the lost tomb of Cleopatra and Mark Antony? Let's find out. According to Egyptologist and former Egyptian Minister of State for Antiquities Affairs Zahi Hawass, finding Cleopatra's tomb would be the most important discovery of the 21st century. This was mentioned by Hawass, and in addition to keeping archaeologists, historians, and researchers busy for years to come, a discovery comparable to that of King Tut's tomb may shed light on the nature of funeral temples in ancient civilizations. In 1922, King Tut's tomb was found. Furthermore, it's likely that lingering questions about the monarch, particularly the circumstances surrounding her demise, could one day be answered. Cleopatra Philopator VIII ruled as queen of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt from 51 to 30 BC. She is most famous for her friendships and relationships with Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. The long-lost tomb of Cleopatra might be accessible via a tunnel that was found beneath Egypt's ancient Taposiris Magna temple. Granite was cut through many strata to create the tunnel. The tunnel, which is being praised as a geometric miracle, stretches for more than 4,800 feet, is roughly 6 feet tall, and is said to mirror the tunnel of Eupalinos on the Greek island of Samos, which is known as one of the most notable engineering feats of the classical era. The tunnel may hold the key to learning that Cleopatra, the final pharaoh of Egypt, and her lover Mark Antony were buried inside the temple, according to archaeologist Kathleen Martinez of the University of Santo Domingo, who has been convinced of this reality for more than 10 years. The Taposiris Magna Temple is located in Egypt, close to Alexandria, which used to be the capital of the country. The ancient building's name means Great Tomb of Osiris. If the queen is interred there, it is quite likely that the last Egyptian pharaoh's remains will also be found, which Martinez calls the most important discovery of the 21st century. Martinez told Heritage Key that it was her duty to look for the last Egyptian queen if there was even a 1% chance that she might be interred there. Researchers said their discovery has changed forever what they know about the architecture, because it is the first time that any archaeologist has discovered tunnels and corridors beneath and inside the temple's enclosing walls. The archaeologist believes Cleopatra made elaborate plans for them both to be buried there when Mark Antony committed suicide after losing to Caesar Augustus, commonly known as Octavian. According to Martinez, who has worked in the temple of Taposiris Magna for more than 15 years, Cleopatra negotiated with Octavian to allow her to bury Mark Antony in Egypt. The narrator stated she intended to recreate the myth of Isis and Osiris by being buried with them. The ancient Egyptians claimed that the religion of Osiris truly conferred immortality. According to the biographers of Cleopatra and Antony, the gods would allow Cleopatra to live with Antony in another form of existence after their death so that they have eternal life together. Martinez may have found herself on the right track after learning about the tunnel carved into the rock, which is around 43 feet below the temple. A portion of the tunnel that was buried beneath the Mediterranean Sea surface was found by teams working at the site. A rectangular slab of limestone, a blind finish, and numerous ceramic jars and pottery tractors were also found buried beneath the mud and silt. Because of the at least 23 earthquakes that rocked the Egyptian coast between 320 AD and 1303 AD, the research team speculates that the foundations of the Taposiris Magna Temple may also be underwater. Martinez also found several important artifacts inside the temple, including coins bearing the likenesses and names of King Alexander the Great and Queen Cleopatra, as well as several headless statues and statues of the goddess Isis. 2 years ago, the team said that they had discovered 2 mummies, one of which belonged to a guy and the other to a female, both of great status in ancient Egypt. Due to water intrusion into the tomb, the mummies, which had to remain undisturbed for 2,000 years, are in a horrible state of preservation. The fact that they were first wrapped in gold leaf, a perk that was only available to society's most prominent nobility, suggested that they had a close contact with Cleopatra. The conflict between Cleopatra VII and her young brother for the throne of Egypt was not going as well as she had intended. After Cleopatra attempted to establish herself as the sole ruler in 49 BC, Pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, who was both her husband and by the conditions of their father's will, her co-ruler, drove his sister from the palace at Alexandria. The queen, who was then in her early 20s, escaped to Syria before coming back and assembling a mercenary army outside the capital. The Roman general Julius Caesar landed at Alexandria in the summer of 48 BC while chasing a military opponent who had fled to Egypt. There he became embroiled in an Egyptian family dispute. Egypt had served as Rome's obedient partner for many years, and Rome had a financial incentive to keep the Nile Valley stable given its enormous agricultural wealth. Caesar moved into the royal palace in Alexandria and called the rival siblings to a peace meeting that he would preside over. However, Ptolemy XIII's army prevented the king's sister from going back to Alexandria. Cleopatra devised a plan to infiltrate the palace so she could meet with Caesar, knowing that his diplomatic assistance may enable her to reclaim the throne. She got her butler, Apollodorus, to wrap her in a carpet, and he gave it to the 52-year-old Roman. A crucial event in the actual Cleopatra's staging of her own life was the young Cleopatra falling out of an unfolded carpet, which has been reproduced in practically every film about her, from the silent era to the 1999 TV miniseries. Egyptologist JOANN FLETCHER, the author of the upcoming biography Cleopatra the Great, asserts that Cleopatra was using all of her talents from the moment she arrived on the world stage before Caesar. Like most rulers of her era, Cleopatra believed she was divine, and she and other members of her family were hailed as gods and goddesses from the moment they were born. Being extremely self-conscious, Cleopatra kept her allure with displays of grandeur, associating with the gods Isis and Aphrodite. As a result, she contributed significantly to the mythology that still surrounds her today. The Hollywood portrayals of Cleopatra are rife with anachronisms, the embellishments, exaggerations, and falsehoods, but they do share the real queen's love of pageantry with Elizabeth Taylor, Vivian Leigh, and Claudette Colbert. Cleopatra was a mistress of disguise and costume, claims Fletcher. She could change who she was to fit the situation. The gesture won over Rome's future dictator for life when Cleopatra emerged from the carpet, presumably looking a little messy but wearing her finest attire. He assisted Cleopatra in reclaiming the throne of Egypt. Ptolemy XIII resisted the ceasefire that Caesar had imposed, but in the subsequent civil war he perished in the Nile, leaving Cleopatra in a secure position of authority. Even though Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Caesar was already married, and Egyptian tradition required Cleopatra to wed Ptolemy XIV, the last of her brothers. To eliminate any challenges to the succession of her son, Cleopatra had Ptolemy XIV slain after Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC. She also eliminated her disobedient sister, Arsinoe, to formally establish her hold on the kingdom. In addition to being a typical aspect of Egyptian dynastic politics in Cleopatra's time, such cruelty was also required to ensure her survival and that of her son. Cleopatra began the task of administering Egypt, the richest country in the Mediterranean region and the last to maintain its independence from Rome once all domestic dangers had been eliminated. So what kind of pharaoh was Cleopatra? Her high level of popularity among her people is inferred from the scant contemporary Egyptian texts now available. Greeks made up the majority of the ruling class in Alexandria, including Cleopatra, who was descended from the general Ptolemy I Soter of Alexander the Great. They would have distinguished themselves from the predominantly Egyptian population by speaking Greek and adhering to Greek customs. Cleopatra, however, truly bothered to master the Egyptian language in contrast to her ancestors. She hired artists to create classic Egyptian-style images of herself to Egyptian viewers. Cleopatra is referred to in a papyrus from 35 BC as Philopatris, which means she who loves her country. Cleopatra consolidated her power by claiming to be a legitimate Egyptian queen. In addition to retaining her power, Cleopatra's foreign policy objective was to keep Egypt separate from the rapidly growing Roman Empire. She strengthened Egypt's economy and increased its standing as a major power by trading with eastern countries like Arabia and perhaps even as far away as India. Cleopatra sought to prevent Octavian, Julius Caesar's heir, and Mark Antony's opponent from making Egypt a subordinate state to Rome by joining forces with him. Although it is apparent from ancient sources that Cleopatra and Antony were in love and that she gave birth to 3 children for him, the connection was also quite advantageous to an Egyptian queen who wanted to strengthen and defend her realm. Even though some contemporary historians have portrayed Cleopatra as a competent, well-liked Egyptian leader, we typically picture her via Roman lenses. Roman propaganda, most of which came from her rival Octavian, depicted Cleopatra as a dangerous prostitute who used sex, witchcraft, and her cunning, as she inspired to power beyond what was acceptable for a woman both during her lifetime and for a century after her death. Late in the 1st century BC, the poet Horace described her as a crazy queen plotting to demolish the capital and topple the Roman Empire. Her description by the Roman poet Lucian, who lived about a century later, was that she was the shame of Egypt, the lascivious fury who was about to become the bane of Rome. Greek historian Plutarch wrote a more empathetic life after Roman rage subsided. With her only motivation being her love for Antony, Cleopatra evolved into a tragic heroine. Over the following 2 millennia, various depictions of her death after Octavian beat Antony, including Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra and John Dryden's All for Love, were made in paintings and plays. To avoid being captured by Octavian, Cleopatra killed herself on August 12, 30 BC, along with her 2 closest slaves. We'll never be able to determine whether the queen was killed by the infamous asp or a smuggled vial of poison, though, because the circumstances surrounding her death remain unknown, even to the men who discovered the dead. However, the asp legend has prevailed, and more than anything else, Cleopatra's picture of death has given her immortality. That's all for today's video, but we'll be right back with more soon, so please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, and thanks for watching.